I'm Andy Murphy from the Navajo Nation, and this is the Toasted Sister Podcast, a show about Indigenous food. It's been almost 4 years since I started this podcast, and I haven't done a show about Thanksgiving. Well, here it is. Thanks to Why Hunger for kicking me into gear. This is a collaboration episode. Here's a little bit about Why Hunger.
At Why Hunger, we don't just ask why. We find solutions to hunger that transform, last, and tackle urgent human needs. Nutritious food is a human right, and hunger is solvable. That's why we work with grassroots organizations and social movements across the globe to ensure everyone has access to nutritious food in efforts to help nourish people now and end hunger for good.
This year marks the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower voyage and landing at Cape Cod, and that's a prelude to that first Thanksgiving dinner between the Pilgrims and the Indians. If you're following your regular American historical programming, everyone ate and got full and happy. Well, those Indians, the Wampanoag, experienced it differently. In this episode, we'll hear from a couple of Wampanoag women about how more than 400 years of colonization affected their food and what they think about current-day Thanksgiving. Let's start with Chef Sherry Pocknett. Her restaurant is called Sly Fox Den.
Wow, Andy. You know, I have a lot of thoughts and they're not great. First of all, I'm going to be just quite blunt about this. The colonizers, they still don't want to recognize Native people are oppressed. That boat means a lot of stuff happened 400 years ago. Disease, the loss of language, our beliefs, the loss of land, the loss of food. People that think that this is, this boat, it carried my ancestors over here, but what happened with that? There's a lot to be said. You know, Andy, it's a lot to be said about the Native people that were here. It was not about the colonizers. It's about the Native people. What happened to us? They just don't think about us. They're still thinking about themselves. And I don't want to seem, they're still thinking, well, today it's a celebration because of this Mayflower. They're bringing the Mayflower over, and it's a great thing. But really what happened 400 years ago, for me, 400 years ago and on, in the middle, in the end, now, 400 years ago, when we greeted them, when we helped them survive, sustain, and they took everything away. So how am I supposed to feel? I don't feel good about that. I don't feel like it should be a celebration. So that's how I feel, in a nutshell. We help these people, and then look what they do. Look what they don't even want to give us 1 day of recognition. You know what I mean? Indigenous People Day. Did you hear that, President? They're still real ignorant, and they really need to be educated. Makes me sad.
Yeah, there's a lot of erasure that is happening, and it doesn't feel good to be the one, just being erased and forgotten. So yeah,
and
cool.
they continue to want to erase us. They continue. I mean, they don't want to acknowledge us even in the polls. Even in the polls, did you see that? Something else, 6%, something else. Yeah. That's going around.
Yeah, I did. So it's been 400 years. How has Wampanoag food been affected by the settlers and by colonization?
How about this? Number one, removal of habitat for animals, fish, overfishing, overhunting, poisoning our land. We live by the bounty of the season. We hunt by the bounty of the season. Our new year starts in the spring when new life comes. After the winter, the winter freezes, it snows, it's cold, and that's the cleanse for us. That's the winter season, and then you get spring, and you have your vegetation coming. It's all new. So this is when we celebrate. There's something that we celebrated. It's called herring. The herring are fish that come from the south, and they come every year, springtime, and that tells us it's a new year. We don't have that abundance like we used to. You know what I mean? Because of a lot of things. Really, overfishing is one of the biggest, because now you have ships, and these fish migrate. So they come to us in the springtime, and this is one of our biggest sources of stability for Wampanoag people, anyways, on the East Coast. They come from the ocean, and they spawn in our ponds. They're there the end of summer, then they start swimming back. And, sometimes when they swim back, if there's something that like when they're swimming back, say somebody blocked the river for them not to get back, it kills off. I mean, I remember one year that was millions and millions of fish just killed because it was no water, because someone had to block up the dam for a reason. And so that following year, we didn't have as many coming back. And then what I hear is overfishing in the ocean, in the big ocean. You know what I mean? By Russian ships and, Chinese and, different countries fishing for these herring. And it's been like this for a long, long time. This is just one example of a fish. And it also includes overfishing of like striped bass and eels. We don't even have eels that much anymore because of the contaminants in the waters that are, or invasive species like something called the Phragmite. It's a plant that chokes off all the other good eelgrass and plants and stuff like that. I could go on and on, but just, habitat, clearing out our animals' homes, but that went in massive. That was massive. All these people coming over. So we have to think about different ways that we have to, sustain ourselves, or maybe help this thing survive, or we'll take the Chinook. We used to, on the East Coast, in my area, we used to have salmon runs. I mean, they still have a little bit of salmon that come, but we don't really fish salmon. We have to, salmon is more upstate, more Alaska, more Canada, more, different places. And right in my area, in Mashpee, there used to be salmon. So now there's no more. They were Chinook salmon. So we're going to hopefully make that happen again. I can't say enough about, taking care of this land. And if you don't take care of it, you won't have that bounty of the season.
Right. What are you trying to do to revitalize indigenous Wampanoag food?
I am trying to teach. I love to teach. Indigenous Wampanoag food. I love to teach about the bounty of the seasons. I love to teach about our way of life, our life ways. And I actually had a class a few years ago. We're going to teach you, these kids and parents, or whoever wants to learn about the bounty of the season and how we lived as seasonal people back in the day. But I grew up in the 60s, and both parents were Wampanoag, and they taught us the way, our life ways, being seasonal people, and taught us early how to go and get these fish, what we had to do to prepare to get the fish. I'm talking about these same herring. We first made nets. We taught them where it goes. We taught them what we did with the fish. We taught them how to identify male from female, that you can eat the roe inside, what to do with that whole fish. So I'm cutting the tail off, I'm cleaning the fish, I'm scaling it, cutting the head off and the guts, and we're throwing that in gardens. That was fertilizer. That's what we use for fertilizer for gardens. And then we would take the backs of the fish and we would salt them. We would cook them how they were. We would, something called corn in it. It's a 3-day salt, and you put the fish in salt for 3 days. And, you know, just teaching that type of stuff and letting the kids and the students know really how it was back in the day, how we survived as seasonal people, and letting them know what's next. So after the heron, we were hunting for wild garlic, wild ramps, which is wild onion, and sassafras tea, and sunchokes, and so much of a variety of different food, and that you can still harvest. So my idea is to get these classes going again for our communities and teaching our children. And my children, my grandchildren, we still live by the season. They learned how to live by the season. We still know our traditional ways. And this is all passed down through oral history and living our life ways, not by a book. Instead of planting grass and using Scott's turf builder, we're going to plant vegetables and food, and we're going to learn about seeds instead.
Very strong feelings, and you can't blame her. Before the Pilgrims arrived, tribes in the area had already experienced the horrors of massacres, slavery, and smallpox by European settlers. Let's hear more from Danielle Hill.
Waninu ka natasuis Danielle ka running water ka pamachuan nutomas masipi Wampanoag. My name is Running Water. I'm also known as Danielle Hill, or Danielle Reindeer most recently, and I am from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe.
Let's start with maybe a little bit of history. What was going on 400 years ago, and what was the state of the Wampanoag tribe then? What was the food situation like back then?
400 years ago was the year 1620, and that was the arrival of the Mayflower. And so the Pilgrims arrived on Cape Cod, and they were there, and then they sort of went back and forth to Plymouth, which was also called Patuxet at the time. And 4 years prior, the natives in that area were hit by smallpox. It's sort of uncertain exactly what was happening at the time, but the result of whatever they were enduring was disease and death, sickness. And so history tells us, and him in history would be the writings from either Edward Winslow or George Mort, who wrote Mort's Relations, and a few other of these European men have written what all of us now know to be the history. But essentially, from her story perspective, and just sort of using common sense, the natives at that time either fled and absorbed themselves into neighboring tribes, or they did descend on into the spirit world, or they may have even shape-shifted into other beings and went into the sea. And so essentially when the Pilgrims arrived, they didn't see many natives. And so that helped them in their own mind to assume that they could stay in that place and make themselves at home in other people's homes, which is exactly what they did. They took the food that was there, but abandoned. They went into the abandoned weetus and took pots. And essentially they were in survival mode, and they were looking for ways to survive, whether it be through finding and sourcing goods or food or just furs or whatever they could gather, because it was November. So it was very cold at the time in New England. And they didn't really have any encounters with natives for about a good 4 months while they were there.
So what kind of led up to the actual like Thanksgiving dinner, and what were some of those foods there?
So the Pilgrims were trying to survive, and they were introduced to a gentleman whose name was Samoset, and he's a native man who was captured and lived in England. So he was able to speak to the Pilgrims, and he also was able to speak in his native tongue. So he taught them how to plant corn and essentially probably how to identify other edible foods and how to probably prepare them. I mean, that is me just using my common sense. I mean, it's written down that Samoset taught them how to plant, and that's really about it. But he most likely stayed with them and helped them to survive. So a whole entire year later, so that brings us to 1621 in the fall time, the Pilgrims have recorded that they are celebrating their first harvest. In the words of history, or Edward Winslow, his accounts sound positive. He says that they feasted for 3 days. So himself, the Pilgrims, and Massasoit, who was a chief in that area, and 90 of his men feasted for 3 days and celebrated essentially. That, in my mind, is always good. It is always good to celebrate food and the abundance of food and survival, especially as newcomers. I mean, I don't have necessarily any bias, or I'm not speaking from a 2020 modern person. I can only just look back and say, yeah, that was probably worth celebrating. None of us really know exactly the relations at that time, but through his words, it sounded as if it was a good thing. That leads us to now think about what Thanksgiving means to us in modern day, and also since that first harvest, how Native Americans have been treated since. And that helps us all to realize how much we should be celebrating today.
What do you think celebrations should look like today?
I absolutely think that we should celebrate a harvest feast. It is harvest time. Harvest time probably would have actually happened about a month or so ago, and the invention of America's Thanksgiving didn't happen until 1860s, and so it was probably placed in the month of November. That was 400 years ago that the harvest feast happened, and maybe the climate was different. But right now, we've already experienced the first frost. Like, you probably wouldn't be harvesting a lot of crops right now. So to me, that's just one slight discrepancy when it comes to agriculture and a holiday. Since it is in November, I think the best that we all can do is to, number one, give thanks to all of the Native American communities that have sacrificed their men and their women and that have endured various levels of oppression over time. I think that's the first thanks that we all should just acknowledge on that holiday. The second thing I would say is we should be celebrating and serving each other the foods that were abundant at the time of the first harvest, and many of those foods are still abundant today. The Mashpee Wampanoag people have never been relocated or displaced, and we still exercise our Aboriginal hunting and fishing rights. So we're still actually eating the same foods that our ancestors ate. The fowl, the turkeys, the birds, the lobster, the fish, the berries, the corn, the beans, the squash, like all of that still is abundant and still is growing here today. So I feel like that's really special. and something to celebrate. So cooking those same foods, and if you can, preparing them in similar ways would be really honorable. And then also creating a spirit meal. That should be something that families should do, whether or not you're native or non-native, but that's one way to indigenize your Thanksgiving meal. And that's very simple. It's just taking a portion of everything that you have served and putting it on a small plate and offering it to the spirits and to the ancestors, and placing it usually outside. The surface level, it's okay if you witness like an animal or something eating your food. Many of us do believe that our past ancestors do take animal form. So that's just one way that you can help, that you can just honor Thanksgiving in a more authentic way.
Yeah. And, you mentioned that, a lot of these foods are still very abundant and readily available. There are lots of tribal businesses out there that are producing, even growing, and, creating food for sale. And sometimes they will do it on a website and they will ship it to you. Is that how you've been able to taste foods from all over?
Absolutely. The website indianag.org has an amazing list of native food producers, and you can absolutely just order your blue corn meal or your smoked salmon. And these tribes are from all over the country, so you can diversify. You don't have to necessarily just eat things from like the New England area, but you can just honor these native businesses and support them financially, and just honor the foods that are organic and non-GMO and grown by native hands.
Yeah, definitely. That's been kind of like the most exciting thing to keep learning about as the producer of this podcast is there's, lots of people that I've come to know, on social media who are sharing all these little businesses just kind of like popping up here and there. And, there's so much. And another resource, the you listeners can go to is the Toasted Sister website, toastedsisterpodcast.com, that has a whole list of native food businesses and a whole map of native restaurants. Of course, when it's safe to go out and visit, restaurants after COVID. You talked about Thanksgiving and kind of celebrating in a different way, a whole different way. That would be really delicious. So what is like the state of Wampanoag food today?
The state of Wampanoag food today is pretty good, to be honest. We still, like I had mentioned, we're still exercising our Aboriginal hunting and fishing rights. So many of our tribal members are still fishing and sourcing our fish and shellfish locally. We do have a tribal business called First Light Oysters. It's a project that not only cleans up the bay through the farming of oysters, but it also is a food product that we do sell to local restaurants in the area. And we just all try to eat as local and as Mashpee as possible. It's one thing to say and eat locally, like in our minds. That's a wonderful mindset. Not only are you supporting local businesses and, you're eating from a place that but the more that you ingest food that has been grown in your soil and in the waters that are around you, the more you become the place that you are living. So, for example, I'm Mashpee Wampanoag, and I introduce myself by saying I'm Mashpee. I don't say I'm from Mashpee or I live in Mashpee. Like, I'm Mashpee because I literally eat and ingest Mashpee. Like the minerals that are in the earth, like the whatever's in the water that our fish are eating, I'm eating too. So that helps us and Native people really become our sense of place. And that's how we've always identified ourselves. So if the waters are polluted, then I'm polluted. Like I can't separate myself from my environment. That's why it's really important for us to continue to be stewards of our land and defend our land and protect our land from pollution, from development, from corruption, just from anything that would harm our plants and our animals. That directly affects us as people. And as a community. And that's something and a message that we've been trying to tell our neighbors and our non-native allies and people that live here in Mashpee and Wampanoag territory. And it's a concept that you really have to understand if you want to become a genuine ally, because we protect our land, not just for ourselves, it's for our survival as a people. It's just a continual fight for our survival and the survival of the plants and the animal beings. And that's so important for everybody to do and partake in. When I think about what I put in my body, I can't separate it from it being alive. So I think that's the first thing that we have to get away from, and what we all should strive towards is just the rights of nature and the aliveness and the soul of whatever it is we're eating, and whatever it is we're consuming. So native or non-native, that's what we have to get away from, is the commodification of these plant animal beings, which is called food. So I don't know, it's hard for me to kind of wrap my head around, but here in Mashpee, because we've generationally been so connected with our foodways, we still look at these plant animal beings as if they're alive, and that they're just helping to nourish us, and that they're giving their mind, their bodies, and their souls to us, and we become them. And that's how we gain knowledge, that's how we gain intelligence, that's how we gain strength, that's how we gain energy. And so that is something that I know other tribes who have been relocated and displaced are striving to get back to. Unfortunately, they've had generations of commodity foods or dead food, and which have impacted their health. And many tribes are trying to reintroduce themselves back into their traditional foodways. And that's so important, because it's just another extension of our survival. And you can't, these tribes are probably not going to relocate anywhere, but the best that they can do is just find out what they used to eat and how they prepared it, and then find their traditions or their prayers that go along with that plant or with that animal, and just strengthen that, and just, figure out how to prepare it, how to cook it, how to eat it fresh. And so that's pretty much what my work is involved in. It's sort of the spiritual aspect of eating, I guess. And I literally just made that up just now as we talked, but it's like that's the closest that I can get to what it is I'm trying to find out, like what it is I'm trying to express through my work. And that's just, how can I just deepen my spirituality through the spirituality or the spirit that exists in what I'm eating.
Danielle is part of a large network of Native people who are reclaiming every part of food, even the spirituality attached to it. Next, let's hear from Talia Landry. She's a production coordinator with Mashpee TV.
Well, Wanikisa, Natasuis Talia, Mashkwasat Manunashk, New Tomas, Masipiat. So good day. My name is Talia Red Clay, and I'm from Mashpee, and I'm from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe.
So Talia, tell me a little bit about your job and what you do in your community there at Mashpee.
Yes, well, currently I am working for the local access station in Mashpee. And what I've been particularly interested in, or my forefronter of my job, has been to really connect the tribal community within Mashpee and the non-native community in Mashpee, and really try and get our culture out there, as well as a better understanding for non-native, so it's more inclusive, because a lot of our history is it's unsettling, because when the colonists first came over, we helped them, protected them, sort of thing and taught them how to live. But then as things were happening and America was formed, obviously natives were pushed off their land. We stayed on, some tribes were pushed off their land. We stayed on our land, but in order to do that, we had to sacrifice a lot of our culture and a lot of our rights to certain lands. So Mashpee actually got turned into an Indian settlement and reservation for a very long time that was protected by the government, the English government or British government. When it came down to choosing whether or not we wanted to become American citizens, we voted twice and our tribe said no, but the United States thought that we didn't know we were better off being citizens, so they forced citizenship upon us, and then we were immersed and we lost our reservation land and our settlement. So then we were just completely immersed and assimilated with the non-native community. So within that, there was a lot of ignorance and conflict, but at the same time, also a growing together, so to speak. Now, the non-natives are very more open to natives, and my job is basically just to exemplify that and to show, different things that non-natives might be questioning, or just to make them feel, I think, a little bit more comfortable and at ease of knowing, more about the natives that reside over this land and are stewards of the land that they are presently residing in.
When you think about all of the history, the awful history of violence, a couple hundred years ago, even up to now, there's lots of injustices that, we're learning about, we're experiencing today just in Native America. Does it make you angry? And then how do you get over that anger, or how do you use that anger?
I mean, I think every Native person might hold a little bit of anger or resentment towards, the American society or just America as a whole, because of what had to be done to Native Americans in order for America to be created. And there was a lot of genocide, disease, violence, and just untrustful, communication between natives and non-natives when developing. So it does make me angry, but it also, as I've grown a bit into my adult life, I think I've been a little bit more humbled about it, because rather than being mad, that our ancestors helped these newcomers into this world, I'm more thankful that we are those type of people that can welcome others, outsiders, with open arms, that we're understanding that it's naturally in our DNA to be welcoming or to be helpful and to thrive like that. So I think my anger has turned more into like a gratitude of who we are and that we actually are still here and exist, because we're not the type of people that are what we would modernize be called like as pushovers, but we were respectful and we held our own in our own ways, and that's the reason why we're here, because if we were pushovers we would be extinct. So I think that's very important to recognize. I think the thing that angers me though is the lack of real history that is discussed about in America, because there's indigenous people here all around, and that's something that we should be teaching our children way before we're teaching them about the outside world, or even like different societies and stuff like that, or politics and stuff. I think it's very important. It should be kind of their foundation, is to learn about the indigenous people of America, rather than kind of shove it in there during Thanksgiving time for a month and just kind of teach the fabricated myth of what Thanksgiving has, been based around.
So you're all about educating people about your own culture. Do you think education is enough, or should we just like revamp the whole month, or even the holiday?
That's pretty tough. I mean, I definitely don't know the perfect answer for that, but I think I would start by not teaching the myth of Thanksgiving as something that's historical, because when you do that, then you're teaching kids a lie, and then when they get older and realize that it's a lie, they're not going to know what to believe, and it's confusing, and it's not right for natives and non-natives to go through that, because sometimes you have natives in school, and if the teacher doesn't know enough about the history of what they considered the first Thanksgiving, sometimes they don't even know that the Wampanoags even exist. And you could have a little Native kid sitting there and saying, I'm right here. Because that's kind of something that, my generation had to go through until we got to this great, a better partnership with the school and the tribe. So now we're fully acknowledged. But that's just here in Mashpee. If you go a town over or 2 towns over, they're still not even as politically correct or accurate, historically accurate. It's a very difficult time. I think if they want to make November the Native American History Month, then do just that and actually teach the histories, but also when revolving around Thanksgiving, teach it what it's about. Say, what we base the first Thanksgiving off of Mort's relation that isn't necessarily, the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags coming together or either being invited or whatsoever and having this friendly interaction. The fact of the matter is the only thing that we know, according to Mort's relation, is that the Pilgrims, they had a successful harvest, they shot off some cannons, and then our sachem, Massasoit, came with 91 warriors. That's all we know. But we know that they weren't invited. And we know that they stayed for 3 days to feast and part of their kind of celebration, but they weren't invited. And it wasn't something that was like a friendly encounter at first because it wasn't an invite sort of situation. So it's not like they're all sitting at the table being kumbaya. It's more like, let's figure out what's going on with these these outsiders. But I do like the gist of Thanksgiving, of the Americanized Thanksgiving, because I think America definitely does need that sort of thing. They need some sort of time to be grateful or thankful for things, because I think that's very forgotten in the Americanized culture. So I do appreciate that they kind of took a piece of our culture and turned it into their own a bit by like just exemplifying gratitude. But I think they should do it a different way, because it's even incorrect of how their Thanksgiving happens, because it happens in November. If, around here in Massachusetts, people know that, your harvest is done back in October or September. You're not celebrating a bountiful harvest at the end of November when the when the ground's cold and you can't grow anything anymore. So, I mean, that's completely inaccurate. So I think if it's taught the way that it's the historical part of it, and then maybe just mention like, during Thanksgiving time, because we celebrate at this time, even though it's not accurate, that you should be thankful for the Indigenous people around you. And we should be thankful for Indigenous people in America in general, because they are the stewards of this land. And they're the reason why that we have all these resources when the colonizers came over to begin with. So I think that's a great start, is to kind of, like hit that myth right in the head and tell it for what it is. It's a myth. And even though kids are young, if you tell them the way that it is and just say, it's a great time to be together with family and be thankful. And it was based off of, or it was a piece of the Native American culture that we turned into an Americanized thing, so we can be thankful or have a time to sit down with family and be thankful, then I think that's a better way to approach it, rather than saying this kind of kumbaya situation happened between natives and non-natives at that time. So that's the only thing about Thanksgiving. But also with natives too, just to remember, like, there is obviously going to be some anger in you, but also try to be a little bit grateful as well, because we are still here. And I think that's so important, especially for our youth that are going through that stage of like trying to figure out that intergenerational trauma and like just having feelings and not knowing where it's coming from, that it's okay to be mad. It is okay to be mad. Try not to take it out on non-natives, but it is okay, and it's okay to reach out to elders and tribal members to discuss these things, because it's humbling at the same time.
Yes, that anger is something I've dealt with too. I still deal with it. Learning about the real history of America is learning about one injustice after another until present day 2020. It'll break your heart and it'll make you angry. But I say that's a good thing. For me, I turn that anger into energy for the work I do today. And having a broken heart only makes me tougher and thankful that we're all still here. So don't let these uncomfortable feelings of anger and heartbreak turn you away from learning about Indigenous people and our food. Use that to understand us and make more meaningful connections with us. So as long as Thanksgiving is still a federal holiday, who knows, it could change. And when November comes around, which is National Native American Heritage Month, learn about the contemporary us. Find out what tribes are in your area and learn about the issues they face today. And learn about their food and taste their food. I've been asked a lot about how non-natives can support natives during this time, and here's my answer. Learn about the issues that are important to us right now, and support native food companies, chefs, and restaurants. This podcast and the website Toasted Sister Podcast is full of names, and there's a long list of native-owned food companies and a map of native-owned restaurants there. Also, check out American Indian Foods at indianagfoods.org. Thanks once again to Why Hunger for this collaboration, and thanks to Chef Sherry Pocknett, Danielle Hill, and Talia Landry. Subscribe to Toasted Sister Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to the newsletter via the website. Support through Patreon and by purchasing some Toasted Sister merch on the website, toastedsisterpodcast.com. This podcast is supported by the Koahnic Broadcast Corporation. Music is created by one-man band C.W. Ione. Find his music at cwione.com. That's cwayon.com. And we'll see you next time.